Welcome to the Between Our Stories podcast. Between Our Stories started as a small group of us friends wanting to tell stories from the most authentic place we could. We wanted to explore the substance of our stories and what lied underneath if we just took the time to dig a little deeper. As we started to explore what this means, we found that there are others that were also on this journey too. Our invitation for you is to join us to dig a little deeper and see what our own stories are offering to us and how our experiences overlap and give rise to the space of the in-between. Thanks for joining us as we explore the spaces between our stories. Welcome to our Between Our Stories podcast. We are just looking at getting to know you a little bit more and hearing a bit more of your journey, but let's start with that. Do you want to give us an intro of who you are and how you ended up here? Tell us a little bit about what you're doing.
You're gonna right now?
Who you are. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So I am part-time studying, on my way to figure out what it means to be ordained in the Uniting Church in Australia. I'm a table tennis coach. Nice. I'm a musician.
Yeah.
What else am I? Yeah, those are pretty good. Oh yeah. I work with kids sometimes.
Yep. You do some OSH work.
I do some OSH work. Yes.
Yep.
So before and after school care, that's good.
Yep.
Some vacation care.
Yeah,
that's all right.
I mean, you're trying to work out what it means to be a creative in the midst of that.
Yeah, in amongst all of that, and I think a lot of it does inform some of the stuff I do, or inspire maybe. It's particularly like how I'm creating or who I'm creating for. I think. Yeah.
Do you have any current projects or anything you're working on at the moment?
Oh yeah, this year I've actually been signed on as a Nexus Arts Interplay artist, and so one of our major projects, I guess, is as like a co-headline act at the Nexus Arts venue.
Yeah.
Which is like a full set, generally my own music.
Yeah.
And basically, just a full-on gig, designed, inspired, and by my own music and stuff. So
you've been doing that all year, or the last couple of months?
Just started this year. Yeah, I guess it would be just a few months, but yeah.
Yeah. And then when's this this gig gonna be? Is this coming up, or
it's in November.
Have you had to plan and
well, so far the date for it is November 18. And so far I am still in the planning phase, trying to figure out how I'm setting my music up into a coherent story, perhaps. That's kind of where I'm at actually with that. So it's not really happening that far, but we're not far in. Early stages is what I would say. But a lot of that is kind of spent writing music, for example, the one I sang Between Our Stories. And kind of like polishing some of the other things I've got going on there.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, I want to ask you a little bit more about that process, but given this is our Between Our Stories podcast, and we have a bit of an Asian Australian flavor, I might open off with tell us a little bit about how your Asian Australian experience connects with your creative process and what that means to you. What's it mean to be Asian Australian and a creative?
It's such a loaded question, but I think straight off the top of my head, it is the essence of which inspires and informs me as a person and my practice. I think of my Asian Australianness to be very in between things, or hybrid-ish kind of things. And so I try and synthesize that in my music. I try to hold the tensions of two different types of things and find a way to make them mash together within my music, whether that's through the lyrics, which is, again, inspired by my own experience as someone growing up, colored in a very, I guess, white world. And even just my musical choice of the certain chords and because I think with the music, it reminds and flavors, I guess, the feel of it in a certain way. And so I try to adapt and adopt certain types of colors into my music, certain flavors into my music.
Yeah.
To, at least for myself, that highlight my own Asian Australianness.
Yeah. Would you say that there's a lot of like tension in that then?
Absolutely. Yeah. Even like there's tension, I think, in the music and within myself, and that's like bringing that out.
Yeah.
And I guess figuring a way to like crystallize that in my music.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you mainly play guitar, is that?
Yeah. Predominantly guitar. And I think my main instrument is the like vocals.
Yeah, okay.
But my guitar is one of the best ways that I can accompany myself. With my voice.
Yep. Yeah, and then I imagine coupled with that is like writing lyrics and writing, like
for sure.
You said you've been working on this new song and you performed that at Between Our Stories. Well, can you describe a little bit of the tension in that? Like
I guess in the songwriting process, it took me a few weeks, I guess, to really mull over what it like felt for me. Like, I guess part of my process is like, I need a topic, I need an idea that I can run with. And then from there, everything kind of flows out of that. Like, it's kind of like a mind dump or mind map. I just kind of like, what does this mean to me? And then I kind of just explore from there.
Yeah.
With this whole Between Our Stories kind of thing, I was thinking when I would get onto stage, like what would that feel like, particularly when I'm facing a lot of people that I know or maybe look similar to me or understand my experience a little bit already. And the first thing for me was just like, that's almost like homeness. When I'm when all the faces looking back at me are just like, they're like my own people too, you know? And so that's kind of what actually informed this new song that I wrote. Just what does it feel like to be home? Like, what does it feel like? It's just like, it's all my people around me. There's a bit of love. There's a bit of, a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Yeah. There's like there's a personal experience and
absolutely
and feeling connected to that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So what about this other song, Orient? That's I've heard you playing around with this over the last couple of years, and I've heard you talk about it kind of changing shape.
Yeah.
Has that been a part of this personal identity formation thing? You've talked about growing as a Asian Australian person and understanding what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like this song was like maybe a marker of the start of my journey. Like, I feel like a lot of that Asian Australianness was already within me, but maybe it was just covered by a few layers of my own colonialisms or learnt experiences from just living in a very Western world. Orient became like, in some ways, like the expression of the feelings and experiences within myself down onto paper. And I think that, and like, as I've told you, and I guess shown with you and tracked with you, like, it has been quite a journey. And so I'm still looking back at it and being like, I'm learning so much more about myself from back then for now. And it's like, okay. And I can continue learning from that. I think, it feels quite like a living thing because I'm still uncovering what it means for me. I don't know, some of the words in it goes from west I come to east I go. That's in the chorus part.
Yeah.
I feel like that was me trying to say, like, I am so like whitewashed in a sense.
Yeah.
But I want to go back and to understand what my heritage was and is and what that might look like now.
Yeah.
And there's countless things like that. There's also a bit of faith in there and like what that means for me, and how that informs, I guess, my identity. I think that song really highlights me, like being like, I don't know, like what this identity of mine is, but I do know that there's something there, and I really want to be spending the time, to just think about it and reflect or learn, talk to others,
like unpack
exactly
what's been going on. I've heard you talk about like learning Cantonese or like wanting to speak Cantonese more. Like when I hear you say go back to the east, has there like what's that look like for you? Have you traveled back to like where your parents have been, or is it like asking questions and stories of your parents? Like,
yeah,
what's that journey been like for you?
I think it's been interesting the more I unpack it, the more I realized maybe I was a bit amiss with it, because I grew up speaking English and Cantonese. My Cantonese is not very good, from the get-go anyways. But I realized at some point along this journey of discovery, my parents like learnt Cantonese as well, and that wasn't their home tongue or heritage tongue either. Yeah, it was actually like Vietnamese, because my parents, they migrated to Vietnam. Yeah, so grandparents from China, Taiwan, or like Guangzhou, like region. So although they did have a bit of that Cantonese in amongst that, it wasn't really their language. Yeah, okay. But when they came to Australia, they got connected really closely with like a Cantonese speaking community. Yeah. And that's where their Cantonese, I think, was really cultivated. Yeah. For myself, that's where I went back into this Cantonese community, and I was like, okay, like I'm gonna spend time here, and that's where I practiced my Cantonese. Although it's still bad, it is a little bit better than before. Yeah. I actually went back there yesterday, and I spoke a little bit of Cantonese, and they just laughed at me and be like, we've missed this, or like, oh yeah, you haven't changed, or like,
that's pretty funny. Yeah. I feel like there's like heaps of complexity in that as well, like considering, you know, like I guess you would have, I imagine you wrote that song thinking, I'm going back to speak Cantonese. Yeah. But like, that's not even necessarily the case.
Yeah.
Right?
It's not even, it doesn't actually, it might not actually be mine, you know, like, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's a huge complexity. Like who you speak to. Like I've heard people that have had a similar migration pattern, like their grandparents might not even speak Cantonese as the dialect. Yeah. Right? It could be like Hainanese.
Hainanese.
Wow.
Yeah, very fascinating. And like it kind of is funny because I guess my last name is Phan, which is very Vietnamese. And so when I talk to Vietnamese people, they're like, oh, yeah, Phan, yeah. And they start speaking Vietnamese to me. And I'm like, oh, dear.
That's not my context.
I'm like, nope, that's, not my story.
Yeah, okay. Well, I can see how like that starts to come into like your music and your creativity and your exploration into that. Like the other kind of questions that we're going to be forming around this Between Our Stories podcast is asking about like what are the challenges for Asian Australians engaging in the work of creativity and artistry and art, like.
Yeah.
What's been your journey like in that space?
Yeah. I think, like I was saying before with this Orient song, it really just started out as me being like, I just feel these things that I don't really understand. And like, I don't know how to articulate it. I don't know how to work through it. And I don't know who else to turn to in this kind of thing, because it's very deeply personal. And like I think back then when I was growing up, and I guess a couple of years ago when I was writing it, like I just wasn't really confident in sharing that with someone. And maybe it's because I just didn't know who to share that with, to walk with me, or like, you know, to be like, okay, like how can we explore this? And maybe that's why I may have needed a counselor or something. but maybe even then, like I have seen some, and they don't really understand this, like these cultural dynamics and the complexities of being in between things. So then I just turned to music, which is something that I guess growing up was quite fond of. So I just wrote some music, wrote down, and I was like, okay. I think Orient actually, as an example, I think I just sat down one evening in like an hour and just like wrote it out, and then it exists now. I feel like that's like the most raw type of creation. You know, like it's like that. You know, you just like vomit it out onto the page, and then I'm still unpacking it now, you know?
It's like 20 years of like bottled up emotion.
Exactly. It's just like all of this stuff, like bam. And it's like, oh, okay, yikes.
Like Asian Australian like trauma accumulated.
Oh, definitely.
And then burst into a song.
Literally. Just like, I think as you're saying, like I'm still figuring it out though, you know? It's this thing from all this like experience, all these traumas or whatever that might be. And it's just like in this page. And I think that's actually what the song is. It's maybe more of a reflection kind of piece or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting.
Yeah. What about like support? Like, do you get much support from your family, like community? Like,
I think
are people like go out there?
Yeah, like I think like nowadays, I think I've shown maybe not resilience.
Yeah, right.
Like my parents have shown, but maybe a stubbornness of like just doing the music thing, you know. I remember this one day I was just like playing at the piano at my parents' place, and like mom just like comes up to me. She's like, "Okay, I give up. Like, you should do your music thing. You should participate in it, and you should try and just do it." Yeah. And that for me was a really big moment, because I was like, I had never grown up hearing that type of thing. Like music, for example, piano was purely, I think, an educational thing, or like part of the cultural narrative. You know, you learn piano, you know, some instrument.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
But this moment when my mum comes to me, she's just like, yeah, you're actually like, I recognize this. And for me, I'm like, obviously, because like I can't do anything else anyways. Like I'm like, I don't take interest in many other things. But I think in that moment, it's kind of like this, like, oh yeah, like I think I have either they've just given up on me or that they're like, okay, maybe he's a little bit different from the norm.
Yeah.
And I think that shows, a little bit of my parents' grace, maybe.
Yeah.
Like, I think they're like, oh, okay. Like, oh, okay, I can see this. Like, maybe he's not the typical type of, you know, kid in our community.
Yeah.
But I think they gave me that power just to kind of do it. I don't know.
Would you ever have imagined being a musician as a kid? Like, did you dream about that as a child, or was that so far off? Like,
I think it really was so far off. Like, even today, I think to myself, wow, like, I'm a musician. Like, this is wild. Yeah. Like, and I think I'm still processing that, like, literally, like, to this day.
Yeah, right.
Like, it's just so wild. I remember, like, driving back from Bendigo, from coming back from my partner's family home. Yeah. And I got this message, like this email from Nexus Arts saying like, oh, you got in. Yeah. And I was just like buzzing the whole drive home. It's like 6 hours home. I drove the whole way back, just being like, oh my gosh, like, am I a musician? I think I'm a musician. Like, oh my gosh, I'm a musician. Like, and I was just 6 hours of that.
Yeah, right. So that's like your made it moment.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, someone's
recognizing me as a musician. I'm like, because I would have never told myself that I am. Yeah. You know, I like just kind of boxed it very far away into like this tiny little corner. Like, maybe music for me is just playing covers, you know, or like playing at weddings, but that's all I'll ever be. But they'll never really hear the Asian Australianness within me. They'll just hear what they want. Like, but obviously that's a different kind of genre. But you know, that's the stuff I was telling myself.
But it's like an extra thing. It's like an addition thing. It's not.
Yeah,
it's not what
it's
you
not
do.
It. Yeah.
Yeah. So you could. Like, am I hearing that you could say like, oh, I'm Dan Phan, musician?
Yeah.
Like, that's it.
I think so. I think so.
Well,
like,
not that's it, but
but like that's part of my title now. Like, no, you know, that's how I would sometimes introduce myself. Like, like I'm a musician. Like, hey, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very cool. How would you say what does that look like for those young Asian kids that might be like thinking, could I ever be a musician? Like, what's that mean for you now?
Yeah, I think I'm still working through that. Like, I'm still in that phase of just like, maybe this is a possibility. Like you know, like that the multiverse has now lined it up that I could potentially be this, and maybe that is part of like the doorway, the gateway into that as well for anyone else. It's like, actually, maybe there is a chance there, rather than following this other tried and true path that we might know. You know, and like, oh, maybe this is a pathway that we can forge, or that is okay. And maybe it's good. You know, I think, you know, everyone's like journey into identity or who they are. I think there's always a question of, are we good enough, or am I worth this? Yeah. Maybe you are, and maybe I am, and that's kind of wild.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, like, any last thoughts like before we close up? And like, thanks for joining us. And
thanks for having me
on this podcast.
Yeah, it's nice having a bit of a yarn.
Anything you want to plug?
Oh yeah.
Anything coming up?
Well,
this thing November 18th.
Oh yes, this November 18th at Nexus Arts. Yeah. Sam Lau will be there too.
Yep. Okay.
He's the one I'm also. I guess. I say it's co-headlining, but I guess we're just both playing that night. Yeah. That's a big one. I think I'll be at OzAsia Festival as well, Lunky Dumpling Market.
Yep.
So that might be a bit fun. And I've got a YouTube channel.
Oh yeah,
so,
nice.
Yeah.
What's the handle on that?
Dan Phan Music.
Dan Phan Music.
That's it. Dan Phan Music.
Yeah. Go look him up.
Thanks for joining us as we explored the spaces between our stories. I hope you have been able to see yourself in some of these stories. I hope you have also struggled to see too. What does it mean to be Australian in the 21st century? We want to leave that question with you and hope you see more of that in between.